Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It is my great pleasure to be presiding this year over my third commencement as the Dean of Harvard Kennedy School. To the class of 2018, congratulations. Tomorrow, each of you will march across this stage and receive your diploma in front of your classmates, teachers, families, and friends. I am looking forward to that exciting moment, but also, I miss you already. You have made a tremendous difference in your time at the Kennedy School, and this place will not be the same next year without you. There will be other wonderful people starting, but we will miss you. And to those of you who have come to celebrate the accomplishments of the great class of 2018, congratulations to you too. Commencement is such an exciting, if bittersweet, occasion here at the Kennedy School, and we are thrilled that you are here to join this celebration with us. Today, we are gathered for the Kennedy School graduation address. We are very fortunate to have as our speaker, Governor Kasich from the great state of Ohio. Governor Kasich has had a distinguished career in public service at both the national and state levels in the United States, and we are honored that he is here to speak with us today. Governor Kasich was born and raised in Pennsylvania. His parents were both children of immigrants to this country from Eastern Europe. He attended Ohio State University, where, as a freshman, he wrote a letter to then President Richard Nixon expressing his concerns about the country. And as remarkable as it is for the freshman to write that letter, even more remarkably, President Nixon invited John Kasich to come and meet with him. And that meeting came close to the end of President Nixon's political career, but marked just the beginning of then undergraduate John Kasich's political career. Governor Kasich stayed in Ohio and ran for elected office at the age of 26. He won and joined the Ohio State Senate. When he turned 30, he ran for the United States House of Representatives and won that race as well. For nearly 20 years after that, from 1983 to 2001, he represented the 12th Congressional District of Ohio. He eventually became chairman of the House Budget Committee and was one of the architects of the agreement that brought down U.S. budget deficits in the late 1990s. Some years later, I was proud to work with that committee when I was director of the Congressional Budget Office. After leaving the Congress, Governor Kasich spent some years in the private sector. In 2010, he returned to public life by winning election as the governor of Ohio. He was re-elected in 2014 and is in his second term now. As governor, he has been involved in a very wide range of policy issues, including taxes, the role of labor unions, policing and criminal justice reform, abortion rules, climate and other environmental policies, immigration and refugee issues, and healthcare policy. Not surprisingly, the positions that Governor Kasich has taken on those various issues have won approval from some people in Ohio and disagreement from others, and the same is certainly true by the people represented in this tent today. One of the wonderful and important principles of the Kennedy School is that this is a place where people stand for their views and listen to others with different views with civility and respect. Governor Kasich joined the 2016 presidential race Governor Kasich joined the 2016 presidential race. He won the Ohio primary and then suspended his campaign. After leaving the race, he declined to support Donald Trump's candidacy and said instead and said instead that he had voted for Senator John McCain. Governor Kasich has also been the author of 4 best-selling books. The most recent is titled Two Paths, America United or Divided, and reflects on his presidential campaign and his hopes for the future. In his State of the State address delivered before the Ohio legislature this March, Governor Kasich appealed to all people to live according to the values of compassion, humility, forgiveness, responsibility, justice, and respect. And he applied those values to citizens and to public leaders, emphasizing that, quote, "The worst thing in life is not to lose an election. The worst thing in life is to serve yourself instead of others," unquote. I am delighted that our graduation speaker this year is such a committed servant of others. It is my great honor and pleasure to introduce Governor John Kasich.
Thank you. You know, that was a lot of biography there, but let me kind of tell you the way that things worked. I did go to that small university in the Midwest, Ohio State, 48,000 students. My dormitory at the time was filled with, there were 16 of us, 15 college roommates stuffed into one barracks. It was pretty interesting. And being at a big university and seeing a lot of things happen, there were some things that I didn't like. And so I decided I would try to change these things. And one of my uncles told me, "Johnny, you always start at the top." So I called the president's office and I asked for a meeting with the president of the university, and they were not real forthcoming, and I just kept calling them until they finally let me in. And I went in to see the president of the university, and it was pretty impressive. He was an impressive guy, and his office was really very cool. I mean, beautiful desks, beautiful furniture, beautiful rugs. And he said, "Well, what's on your mind, young man?" I told him my concerns, and I said, "Sir, I've been in school about a month, and I'm undecided here at Ohio State, but when I look at your desk, your chairs, your lighting, your carpeting, everything else, maybe this is the job for me. What exactly do you do?" And so he told me about his academic responsibilities and his fundraising responsibilities, and he said the next day he was going to fly to Washington and meet with President Nixon. And I said, "Sir, there's a number of things that I would like to talk to him about also. Could I just go with you?" And he said no. And I said, "Well, if I go back and write a letter, would you give it to the president?" He'd never seen me before, but he said, I guess I could do that. So I went back to my dorm and I did an analysis of the Nixon presidency, and I signed it, sincerely, John Kasich, P.S. If you want to discuss this further, let me know. I've got time. I can come and see you. So a couple weeks later, I get onto my mailbox and open it up, and sure enough, there's a letter from the White House, the office of the president. I read the letter, I go upstairs to my dorm room, and I call home. And I said, "Mom, listen, I'm going to need an airline ticket. The President of the United States would like to have a meeting with me in the Oval Office." Now, my father carried mail, and my mother was in and out of work, depending on how we were as kids, so they were not people that were power players, just simple folks playing by the rules. And when I said that to my mother, she started screaming, "Honey, pick up the phone. There's something really wrong with Johnny." So it started a debate about whether this was real or not, and my parents finally decided they should just give me the airline ticket. So I flew down to Washington, and I went to the White House gate, and they let me through, and the next thing I know, I'm sitting in the White House right outside the Oval Office. And a guy walks up to me and he says, "You're going to get 5 minutes alone with the President of the United States. What do you think, young lady?" Pretty impressive, huh? Yeah. I'll tell you what I'm thinking. I have a new jacket, new shirt, new tie, new pants. I'm not coming out in 5 lousy minutes. They're out of luck. So they opened up the door, and I walked in, and there's the president. I greet the president, and he says, "Sit down." And the good news is, as an 18-year-old first-quarter freshman, I spent 20 minutes alone with the President of the United States in the Oval Office. The bad news is I spent 18 years in Congress, and if you add up all the time I spent in the Oval Office, I peaked out at the age of 18 and should have gone to Harvard. So I didn't really know what to expect when I came here today, and I really didn't know what to expect with this kind of a crowd. I kind of know what I want to say, but this is not like a public policy speech. This is a speech that was really frankly, or the remarks that are frankly directed at a lot of the young people that are here. But when I see the mix of the crowd, I would hope that you would think about what I have to say today, the remarks that I'll make here today, and maybe take them home in one way or another. You know, as you begin to graduate from college, and you have a lot of people that are kind of getting sad, a little melancholy, right? I'm leaving this place, my roommates, and probably in the last few days, you probably sat with some of your best friends and talked about your lives. You talked about what is the meaning of life. You go to a place like Harvard, which is the best of the best, and you are trying to decide how you're going to navigate the real world. And we live in very uncertain times, and the world at times can be confusing. So it's totally proper. It's always proper to reflect back. And we do it at weddings, and we do it at funerals, and we do it at solemn occasions. We do it when there's special moments when we meet with those who we love and care about and talk about the meaning of life. And this, frankly, has gone on since the beginning of time. And I've looked at the philosophers' view, the ones that thought about things like this, Plato and Aristotle, who talked about the eternal nature of the soul and what is life all about. Is life pointed up? Is it here on the earth? They had great philosophical discussions back in ancient Greece at a glorious time. And then there was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who thought about life and was the inspiration of the bloody French Revolution. There was Friedrich Nietzsche, who examined the dark side of human nature, and many said was an inspiration for some of the darkest times in the history of humanity. And then there was Camus, the existentialist. Somebody said, never in the history of America did a governor ever get up at a State of the State speech and mention Camus. Well, I'll do it again today. And if you can explain to me what it means to be an existentialist, send me a note, because I still haven't figured it out. And then there was John Locke, natural law and the way in which we should live. All very impressive people worth spending some time thinking about. But I also spent time thinking about the great theologians throughout the history of the world. There was Augustine, St. Augustine. He was my favorite because Augustine said, you know I need to turn my life over to God, but I've got a couple good parties I need to go to before I do that. And then there was Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, who laid out such an important principle for those that try to study life and our Creator. And he combined both faith and reason. He said they were like two wings of a bird. Blind faith doesn't work, faith without reason doesn't work, but reason without faith doesn't work. And then there was Martin Luther. Martin Luther dared to challenge the church. And in fact, it was such a powerful message that the Pope and political leaders sent out people to actually capture Martin Luther. And then there was William Wilberforce, one of the great inspirations, I think, in modern human history. He is the man that worked to not only abolish the slave trade in Great Britain, but he was also involved in creating a notion of manners, a notion of culture, a notion of how we needed to treat one another. So I'm sure there are people here today who are humanists and have studied this to try to think about their own lives. And for people who get up every day and say they want to build a better world, I'm totally sympathetic and in agreement, and I honor that. But for me, it won't work. It won't work because the winds of change and the fads and the culture knock me off my bearings. I need to have a compass. When I go and hike with my friends, my spouse, and we can't figure out where we are in the woods, I'm not particularly interested in their opinion about how we get out. I want to know who's carrying the compass. And I know that I need to have a compass in my life. But I also know at the same time I go deeper and throw in with the theologians in terms of my life, I also know that when I think about that human reason itself is imperfect. We can never figure it all out. So I've decided to throw in with the theologians rather than the existentialists and Jean-Jacques Rousseau or Aristotle and Plato, although I look at them as well. I have been persuaded by studying and thinking and observing over the course of my lifetime that there's so much more to life. And here's what's so interesting. Christians and Jews and Muslims all basically have the same view of human life. That human life is special. That human life is above all other human life. And that the Creator created this human life and made it above all else. And it is our duty to reflect the character of our Creator and to recognize that every human being is made in the image of our Creator. And if you think about it for a second, just that concept, whether you buy it or not, think about the fact that if we are all made in the image of God, all made in the image of our Creator, we have no right to dismiss or alienate any other human being. It means that we must show respect, something that I think we all yearn for today. And when we are now, when I come to Harvard or been out in the Silicon Valley or been in Europe and I have mentioned that word God, if I were to look at all the thought bubbles across this assemblage today, I'd see a lot of things that are contradictory in some ways and maybe sometimes negative. But I want to tell you what I think it means to put forth and adopt and try to portray the character of our Creator. You see, in many respects, religious authorities have done more to create a negative view of what the Lord wants than those who have no faith at all. And let me suggest to you that when I look at these values, they're pretty simple to me. They're love. Whether it is Old or New Testament, and they had a lot of brilliance. They took the Old and the New and they put it into one book. And if you search that book, you will find that it's all about love. It's about love. It is about compassion. It is about humility. It is about forgiveness. It is about responsibility. It is about justice. It is about respect for others. It's about personal responsibility, but fundamentally it is about living a life a little bigger than ourselves. It really is about treating others and loving others, which means doing good for others even when you have no self-interest. It's about doing that because that is the way that you expect to be treated. That is what faith is. That is the underpinning of what allowed us to adopt a set of virtues so that we could self-govern. Now, I happen to believe those virtues are written on our hearts. I think we carry them around. I think they're instinctive. And let me give you a few examples of this. It wasn't long ago when we looked at the horrible flooding in Houston, Texas. We saw people that were hanging on trees or hanging on their roofs of their homes. And we saw people who didn't even live in Texas put their little boats on the top of their cars and drive to Houston, Texas, and rescue people off of the roofs and out of the trees and to save their lives. And we saw a great sports figure by the name of J.J. Watt, who decided he needed to raise millions and millions of dollars for people that he never met. His life was not moving so fast. He was embracing something much deeper. And it wasn't long ago, and how soon we can forget, this horrible gunman in Las Vegas. And this gunman opened up fire with every weapon that we can think of, turning semi-automatics into fully automatic weapons, and from a hotel window, gunning down innocent people who just went to Las Vegas to enjoy a country show where they could be together with the people they love. And as those bullets rung out, there are untold stories and many told stories of people who threw their bodies to cover those who could have been hit. In other words, they put their lives in jeopardy to serve someone else, and many of them had no clue who the stranger was sitting next to them. You see, that was where those values were shining through. How about those young students down in Parkland, Florida? How about the efforts that they are making to stand up and to speak out? And those people in Parkland, Florida, who put their lives in jeopardy. We had a school shooting in my state, and we had a number of teachers that ran down the hallway to push the gunman out of the building, putting their lives at risk. Heroes? Maybe recognizing some of these instinctive virtues that we have written on our hearts. The state of Texas, the stories of people who put their lives on the line to block students from the bullets that were being fired from a 17-year-old's shotgun. And one more time, J.J. Watt showed up to comfort the people who were in the hospital, to raise money to pay for the funerals of those who had been stricken down. Yes, it's pretty remarkable when we think about the fact that those virtues are written on our hearts, and when we see them, we know how to act. I happen to believe that when we recognize those virtues of love and compassion and humility and living a life a little bigger than ourselves, it can guide us to lead a simple life. I have to tell you, being governor of my state has really been relatively easy. I mean, we're the 7th largest state. But my whole team has operated under the notion, not that we're saints or anything like that, forget it, operated under the notion that if we follow those values, we can help not only those at the top to be successful, but those at the bottom to be successful and to have hope. So it's made it easy to make decisions in public life, because who's cheering for you today is booing you tomorrow, and who's booing you tomorrow is cheering you today. That's why you need the compass. But I have to also suggest that when you follow these virtues and these values, it can come with a big cost. When we think about Martin Luther King, just walked from the train station in Washington to the Lincoln Memorial. As I approached the Lincoln Memorial, I saw in my mind's eye that "I Have a Dream" speech. Martin Luther King would never respond violence for violence. He believed that the higher moral purpose would win. He wrote from a letter from Birmingham in jail that no law of man that doesn't square with the moral law of God is just. And they gunned him down. But the dream lives on. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. When there were too many in the world that turned their backs on the Holocaust, Dietrich Bonhoeffer had left Germany and had moved to New York. And he recognized the fact that I cannot go back and pastor to anybody in my country if I don't return in the middle of the Nazi occupation. He was hung from a tree just a matter of days before the end of the war. But as he was heading to the gallows, he inspired his captors to say there was more to life than just success, that there was more to life, something deeper, and read his stories. Or Natan Sharansky. He was a prisoner of conscience, living in a Soviet gulag, and all he wanted was for the Jews to be released from the Soviet Union. And they said to him, and they put him in prison, and they said to him, "If you will just confess a little bit, we will release you." After all, Galileo recanted. And Natan Sharansky thought about it, in the dark of the gulag, sleeping with rats to stay warm, no meager resources to be able to sustain himself. He thought to himself, if they use Galileo against me, they will never use me against someone else. And he told him to go to hell. Well, Sharansky was ultimately released. And he was on a bridge, and they told the Soviet authorities told Sharansky, I want you to walk straight. And Ash Carter knows this story. As he walked across that bridge, he could not move in a more crooked line than what he did. His final message of defiance to those that held him captive. But it's not always the big shots. So you work at Wells Fargo. They tell you to open up a phony account. I'm not opening one. What happens? You lose your job? Is that the end of it? Do you need to cling to that just makes you comfortable? But are you willing to get out of your comfort zone? Or the story of those people that dragged that human being off that airplane. And I said to somebody, why did somebody at the ticket counter not stand up and say, I won't put up with this? And somebody told me, well, they have a mortgage. They have a job. See, there's a guy in the Old Testament by the name of Daniel. They put him in the lion's den. Guess what? We all enter the lion's den. It's just a matter of how we handle it when we're there. You see, there is a price to pay for standing up. But when you do stand up, you go down in the memory, the minds of people around you as a hero, as an inspiration. You know, look, we all fail. We're all hypocrites. I was at the Boston Globe earlier today at editorial board. I said, I'll be the #1 hypocrite, but what I have to say about virtue doesn't nullify it because I can't live it. The fact that I can't live these values does not make those values wrong or those virtues wrong. I have a responsibility, but I'm weak and I'm flawed and I can't do it until tomorrow or maybe next week, when I can finally brush myself off and get enough courage to stand tall, at least for a day. Because we see today in our society, whether it is speed of life or ego or position or money, it's infecting our whole culture. And we tend to want to think about politics, those bunch of bums, okay? I understand that. But you know, we spend time thinking about them because sometimes we don't want to think about what we're doing, where we live, how we're carrying out our lives. You know, I've mentioned Wells Fargo. How about virtue and profit? Oh, the Pope's controversial now because he said they think he doesn't like capitalism. Michael Novak, the great Catholic theologian and philosopher, said that any free enterprise system that is not underlaid by a set of values is bankrupt, and I buy it. I buy it. If you're in business and you're a leader and you're a CEO or some big shot, what are you doing to remember those virtues? Stop talking about the politicians. Let's talk about the people that are in the corner office. Sports. We look at the NCAA. Are you kidding me? We look at athletes who have been abusive to their spouse who play on Sunday. Hollywood. How's that been going? The Me Too movement, thank goodness. And the media. I've got to have hits and clicks, and I've got to make money, and I got to do what I got to do because I got to go with headlines that'll get people to look so I can make more money. Journalism in the media is a critical part of freedom. The first thing the autocrats do is to take it down. But if you're in it, you have a responsibility to report the news, not just to think about profits. And we know about religion. We know about the failures, and we know about the problems of politics where too many politicians put service to self ahead of service to others. These mistakes demean us. They lower the bar in our society. But you know what? It's not going to be this way, and it will not be the way if we slow our lives down and think about what real meaning is. When we think about humility and love and compassion and treating others in a special way and living a life a little bigger than ourselves, you see, my hope is there for humanity because I know those virtues are written on our hearts. And if we will just slow down, if we would just sit down and reflect, we'll get it right. And then you might say to yourself, I'm just little old me. What am I going to do? Little old me. Do you know how powerful you are? I don't care who you are. I don't care whether you're the dean of the school or whether you're out here parking cars or whether you're the policeman on the corner or whether you're the scrub lady at night. Everybody has power. The power to spread this contagion of courage to another person. We all do. And boy, don't we feel good when we do it? Don't we just feel great when we do something special for somebody who's down on their luck? Don't we feel special when we lift somebody else up? Oh, we always do. So it's on us. We have a new CEO at the Cleveland Clinic. He actually was here at Harvard, and he was recruited relentlessly to move to the Cleveland Clinic. So after he'd been badgered for enough years, and he's a Bosnian Croatian, he made a visit to Cleveland. And he was met by an escort. And they were walking through the halls, and the escort looked at this big heart transplant doctor and said, could you just wait here? This lady over here, she's a little bit confused. And he stood there, this doctor, and this escort went and helped that woman to go to where she needed to be. The doctor told me that was the moment he believed he needed to go to the Cleveland Clinic, because that escort had made such an impression on him about what the people of Cleveland and the culture was like, he couldn't resist. He's now the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, thank goodness. In my State of the State, I give out awards, medals, courage awards, and I gave one to a 10-year-old kid. Now, this kid's parents have been involved with drugs. I don't know if they're I don't know what the whole story is, but he's been raised by his grandmother, and he'd spent a lot of his time, his young 10 years, in and out of homeless shelters. His grandmother said, kid, I'm going to give you an Xbox for Christmas. It's going to cost about $300. The 10-year-old boy looked at his grandmother and said, why don't you just not give me the Xbox and take the $300 and buy blankets for people who live in the homeless shelter? Now, did the 10-year-old change the world? I think he did. Or we had an EMT who was out there in Vegas that night. Very interesting. She was there. She could have run. She didn't. She waded through the blood on the parking lot and administered first aid to the people who had been attacked in Las Vegas. She's a simple lady. Simple? Huh. Courageous? You bet. So what about all of us? Well, maybe we all need to think about those things that can help knit together our society. You see, we all keep hoping that somebody's going to come riding in on a white stallion and fix all of our problems. You wait for the politicians, you might as well wait for Godot, because they're not coming. You want to fix this country? You fix it where you live. And you knit together in a network of people who seek the truth, who are objective and rational, and you put them together and you build a network and a league, and you'll fix the country. See, the civil rights movement didn't get fixed from the top down. It started with a woman who moved from the back of the bus to the front of the bus and sent a message to the entire world about human dignity. The church leaders would not say no, and they forced action with the politicians. And frankly, that's how the Vietnam War ended. because people on these college campuses all over America said, enough. We're not in. They drove it from the bottom up. And you want to change this world, we need to work together and drive it from the bottom up, and hoping that those people who are in the corner offices will greet us halfway and begin to transform the world in which they live. Now, for the old fogies here, the baby boomers, those that are not quite baby boomers, my hope's in the millennials, these graduates today. I hate this. I don't know if they learned it from our failures or whatever, but they're not in it for the money. I was over at IBM yesterday at Watson Health. Guy was there, he was saying, you know, my daughter, she doesn't want to work here. She wants to go work at Patagonia because she thinks there's more meaning in that. That's what she wants to do. Our millennials are in search of more meaning, of trying to make a big difference in the way the world works. You see, my hope is in us, but my hope is really in the millennials. All of you who are here today who are going to graduate from a prestigious university where you have automatic power. I believe in you, and I want you to believe in yourselves, that you can change the way that the world turns on its axis. You can, you will, you must. We're counting on you. Good luck, and God bless you.